When you begin to trace the root of the slasher film genre, all roads must start at Alfred Hitchcock. Hitchcock, a prominent English film director born in 1899, is considered one of the greatest film directors of all time even to this date. Hitchcock has been deemed the master of suspense, and no one else to date has come close to stealing that title from him and probably never will. Hitchcock has directed upwards of 50 feature films in his career, most of which deal with murder and mystery and some compactly. Hitchcock admittedly delights in frightening his audience and keeping them on the edge of their seats in complete terror, driven by deep suspense. Despite his fascination for all things murder and macabre, Hitchcock denies being a monster.
Well, that's the thing, you see. Most people think that I am, because of the material in which I indulge, shall we say, professionally, that I must be a monster. Well, I'm just the opposite to that. I'm a very placid, calm individual. And I am scared of getting into any difficulty. Somebody once said to me, "What is your idea of happiness?" I said, "A clear horizon."
The image that you have contrived, and I'm certain you've done this carefully over the years, is one of dourness, of seriousness, of conveying an impression of mystery. Does Alfred Hitchcock ever tell jokes, or do you have a little sense of humor where you would...
I would say more that way than that's the whole thing I was saying to you earlier, that people think that one is a monster and they relate me.
Even with his stoic body language, seemingly lack of emotion or empathy and fascination with death, he still retains a sense of humor that is almost never attributed to him.
I think my mother scared me when I was 3 months old. You see, she said, "Boo." It gave me the hiccups.
Yes?
And she apparently was very satisfied. All mothers do it, you know. That's how fear starts in everyone.
Well, that's an interesting insight into psychology. I didn't realize that.
Weren't you ever booed at by your mother?
For a man who preys on the fears of others and who willingly immerses himself daily into a world of nightmares, it would be easy to think he had no fears of his own, but that would be a mistake.
What frightens you? What are you afraid of?
Most things. I'm scared of policemen. I never drive a car on the theory that if you don't drive a car, you can't get a ticket. So therefore, that's absolutely true. I'm scared stiff of anything that is to do with the law. Although I'm fascinated by it, but I would hate to be involved myself. And I think I'm more scared of that kind of thing.
Why?
I'm a coward, I suppose.
With North by Northwest beginning post-production, Hitchcock set his attention on his next potential project. At the airport, Hitchcock picked and read the book Psycho by Robert Bloch, based partly the life of Ed Gein, a real-life serial killer. Ed Gein, but later also became the inspiration for other shocking horror films such as Silence of the Lambs in 1991 and The Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974.
It's a much more violent book than it is a movie. You know, the girl gets beheaded in the shower as opposed to simply stabbed to death. But the book is mild by comparison with the facts of Ed Gein. This is one of those series of murders that so shocked the nation that it became part of American mythology. And, you know, we weren't around in 1960, so it's hard to know how the facts impacted the fiction. But one's got to assume that one of the reasons why both the book and the movie are so successful is because people knew that, albeit remotely, they were based on truth. The contemporary accounts speak of the police, who I think were a tough bunch of people, still being totally appalled at what they found inside. Here's a guy out in Wisconsin, the wilds of Wisconsin, who does in a whole bunch of his neighbors and his mother. And, you know, these were innocent women who had committed no crime against this man whatsoever. They were just, you know, happened to be his neighbors. I mean, this was obviously a crazy, sad man, and who became a piece of American mythology, I think. And he is the underpinning of Bloch's book, but he obviously is there, we say this, in spirit, in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre pictures, and arguably in Silence of the Lambs.
Psycho, the book, is quite the gruesome tale, even by Hitchcock standards. It explored several themes that weren't completely acceptable for the big screen at the time, such as cannibalism and transvestism.
I had a meeting with some people from the production code. You won't believe what upset them more than anything else. The word transvestite.
Why was he dressed like that? He's a transvestite.
They said, you cannot use that word. And I said, why? It's a scientific word. And they apparently had some preconceived notion that this was very dirty and that I was trying to put one over on them. And so we got a dictionary, and it's a man who likes to wear women's clothes. And I think they were a little embarrassed. But I was shocked that they were ready to put their foot down on that.
What's that?
Once Hitchcock had any sort of idea for a new film, he would first run the idea by one person very close to him. Depending on their thoughts, the idea would grow into something more or die a tragic death like one of his characters.
My mother was the one who really, you know, was in on everything from the very, very beginning. When he would find a story that he was anxious to do, he would have her read it. If she didn't think it would make a picture, he didn't touch it. And then she would be the first one to read the treatment and the screenplay, and she was, you know, even in on a lot of the casting, too. And it was wonderful. When she died, Charles Chaplin of the Los Angeles Times said, the Hitchcock touch had 4 hands and 2 of them were Alma's.
Once Joseph Stefano signed on to write the screenplay to Psycho, one big obstacle presented itself early on in the writing phase. It became apparent that in order to make the film have any audience appeal, there needed to be a major overhaul to the real main character, Norman Bates.
In the book, Norman Bates is actually a middle-aged man, a reprobate, drinks, overweight, wears big thick glasses, peeps through holes. I thought he was incredibly unsympathetic. I didn't like him. So when Marion gets killed, I am then expected to switch my empathy toward this man, and I couldn't do it with the character as he was written. So I perceived a young man, vulnerable, good-looking, kind of sad, makes you feel sorry for him. And Hitchcock said, what would you think of Tony Perkins? And of course, that was practically what I had described.
Just to show how conservative the times were as far as what could be seen on the big screen, Stefano had one request that he was prepared to fight for vehemently.
I said to Hitch that I would like to see the toilet in the bathroom. I said, every movie I've ever seen of a bathroom, there's no toilet. in it. And I would like to see that toilet. I think the audience will be unsettled by the sight of it. An audience that had never seen a toilet on screen was going to have some kind of perhaps subconscious reaction to it. And Hitch laughed because he thought I was into my Freudian kick and talking about what toilets mean and potties and stuff like that. And we talked about it, and he said, well, put it in the script. Say that we see the toilet. And instead of saying just in the body of the directions, we see the toilet, I thought, you know, that'll be struck down so fast we won't know what's happening. I had her make up the little note of the money that she had spent, then tear it up and throw it in the toilet and flush it. And I said to Hitch, do you think they'll let us do that? And he said, well, it's your script. You talk to them. There wasn't too much comment about the toilet. I expected more objections on that. And otherwise, we didn't really have any trouble with them.
Another obstacle placed on the film was the meager budget of only $1 million compared to the $4 million budget of his previous film, North by Northwest. Hitchcock, evidently inspired by lower-budget horror movies of the time that were doing well at the box office, decided to make a lower-budget horror movie of his own. But there would be one big difference with his horror movie: it would crafted by a master.
In my very first meeting with Hitchcock, he said, this is going to be a black and white movie, and it's going to cost under $1 million. And I was flabbergasted because I had never conceived of Hitchcock at that point in his life making a movie for less than $1 million. And he mentioned another company that was making very low-budget movies, which were not terribly good, and were doing very well at the box office. And his feeling was, how would it be if somebody good did one of these low-budget movies?
Early on, Hitchcock also decided to film the movie in black and white in an effort to minimize the gory content, particularly the shower scene, and to undoubtedly save on costs. Several years later, George A. Romero did the same with his zombie epic, Night of the Living Dead, in 1968. In the 1960s, color films had become the new standard and what audiences expected to see on the big screen, so to release a new movie into theaters in black and white could be viewed as a risk.
That's exactly what he wanted to do. He said, first of all, I cannot make this picture in color because it will be too gory. And he said, secondly, I want to make it as simply, for as little money as possible, and I'm going to use the TV crew. And that's what he did. He used the crew that was working on his show, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and he used them for Psycho.
Once filming had wrapped and the film was cut together, it was time to screen the movie before it got sent to censors and see what changes would have to be made.
I hope they are watching.
We knew it was time for the film to go to the censors, the Hayes office, I think it was. So had said, let's get Luigi Loraschi, who was the intermediary for the studio and the censorship, a very nice man, to look at the film and see if there are any problems with it. So immediately after we got the first cut, we had the screening for Hitch, Luigi, George Tomasini, the editor, his assistant, and me, in the theatre at Universal. So we start running it, and Luigi laughs at Hitch's appearance in the film, which took place in the beginning of the film. And then we're watching everything. Then comes the shower sequence, and we're all sort of looking on placidly. We just stop, my God! So Hitch said, yes, Luigi, what is it? Luigi, I saw a breast. No, you didn't, Luigi. It's just in your dirty mind. You didn't see a breast at all. Yes, we'll run it again. So we ran it again. Well, Luigi, did you see a breast? No, but we're going to be in a lot of trouble, I think, with it. We talked about, we didn't. We made him realize that he was wrong, that he hadn't seen the breast, that it was a perfectly charming little Sunday afternoon treat, the shower sequence. and we sent it off with Luigi to the censor.
While the censors weren't completely happy, no major cuts were required.
We did have a few problems with the censor. They sort of said they didn't like Janet and her slip in the beginning, and a few odd things like that, but we tidied them all up.
Usually in the 50s, you never showed the workings of engineering. You always had a lovely full slip over it, probably with lots of little lace and whatnot. So this was quite daring. And then, of course, when we saw her again, it was a black bra. So he got the best of both worlds.
One of the major plot twists in the film is the killing off of the main star of the movie in the first quarter of the film. This move would later be repeated by Wes Craven in 1996 with his slasher film Scream, where the main star Drew Barrymore is murdered within the first 10 minutes of the film. Also, Scream helped revitalize the all-but-dead slasher genre that Hitchcock unpurposely helped create.
I have been asked subsequently, well, didn't it ever bother you that the role of Marion in the script was ended so abruptly? And it never did. It never occurred to me that would be a problem. I mean, you know, that didn't even enter my head.
Due to the fact that the main star of the picture, Marion Crane, played by Janet Leigh, gets killed off in the first quarter of the film, Hitchcock was concerned that audience members coming in late wouldn't be able to fully enjoy the film because they would keep wondering when Leigh's character would appear. Hitchcock came up with a very unorthodox solution to that problem that no one could have ever guessed would actually work.
One day we'd finished shooting, and Hitch said, you know, people who come in late to see Psycho will wonder, where's Janet Leigh? And they'll keep on waiting for her, and she'll be dead, and they won't know it. Well, what can be done about it? So he thought, while we were talking, and he said, you shouldn't allow people into the theatre after the film has started. They'll see Janet will be orderly, and everyone will realize it. So I laughed. I didn't think it would be possible to tell theatre managers when to show the picture and when not to. And he convinced Paramount, publicity, this was the way to start it. And the whole ball started rolling then. And it was successful because the theatre managers cooperated.
It was a great gimmick, if you want to call it a gimmick, because the people had to get in and get down before the picture started, and that brought them in. And then when they left screaming, and some people running out and during the scene, especially during the shower scene, which just added to the enthusiasm of the public wanting to see this picture.
Do not expect to be admitted into the theater after the start of each performance of the picture. We say no one. And we mean no one, not even the manager's brother, the President of the United States, or the Queen of England. God bless her.
Psycho, the psychological thriller horror about the young, awkward and mild-mannered motel operator Norman Bates, played by Anthony Perkins, who has a secret, went on to become a huge success with audiences. Filmed of a budget of less than $1 million, it went on to make $50 million. For a movie to be that successful, you would think that the critics would have given in all their praises, but that was not the case.
Well, the release of Psycho was not critically acclaimed. In fact, the critics didn't, they poo-hooed it. They didn't think this was up to the standard of North by Northwest or To Catch a Thief or Vertigo or all the famous Hitchcock pictures.
I think the critics didn't like being made to see it in a theater. That pissed them off. They wanted to see it in the screening room like they always did, all by themselves or with their secretaries. And Mr. Hitchcock said no previews. And as a matter of fact, the critics had to see it on the day that it opened with the ordinary folk. And I'm convinced that we got a lot of bad reviews because of that.
When one thinks of the film Psycho, undoubtedly one image comes to mind first before all others: Marion Crane in the shower. The shower scene has become one of the most iconic scenes in all of film history. It really foreshadowed what was to come in the future of horror movies. It would appear that audiences wanted to see a more graphic and realistic depiction of violence, and Psycho was one of the first times they got it.
When you're doing this, I don't mean to interrupt you, but when you're doing this, like putting together a scene, the one that everybody likes to talk about is the shower scene in Psycho, or that one especially, can you feel what you think the audience is going to feel when they're watching that, when you're putting it together?
I hope so, except that a scene like that took me 7 days to shoot, because although it was only on the screen for 45 seconds, there were 78 separate pieces of film joined together to get that stabbing and that effect. One hopes they will. You know, you can't predict. But I've been, you know, around long enough to know what audiences, may I say something vulgar, to make the audience feel, you know, there's not a dry seat in the house. I mean, that's the aim.
If you don't know how to do that, nobody knows how to do that. Huh?
Well, it takes a lot of design. It's knowing audiences, knowing what they feel, and it's like suspense.
I've never taken a shower. I cannot take a shower, because it never dawned on me until that moment how vulnerable and defenseless one is. It never entered my head until I saw that.